But hi everyone, my name is Mabaka and I'll be presenting today on Jonah crabs. I'm a second year PhD student from Stony Brook University School of Marine Science in Dr. Yang Chen and Dr. Chris Gober's laboratories. And as I said, I'll be talking about Jonah crabs, specifically some cause for concern regarding their management in a warm world. So just a bit of background about Jonah crabs. They're not a particularly well-known species, and from what I've seen, we haven't gotten to discuss too many shellfish so far at the conference. So in terms of their distribution, ranges from as far north as New England, Canada, to as far down south as Florida. They have a relatively short lifespan of about 1 to 5 years, with an estimated size at maturity for males being about 120 millimeters in carapace width. And then regarding reproduction, like other cancer crabs, mating occurs after females have molted, and their itera pairs reproducing several times throughout their life cycle, with an estimated clutch size ranging from about 400,000 to 1.8 million eggs. And then concerning feeding, they may eat snails, algae, mussels, arthropods, polychaetes, but in turn may be preyed upon by seabirds such as gulls, larger demersal fish species such as tautog, blackfish, and other teleost predators. But overall, it's really important to note that there's a limited amount of data that details the life history characteristics of these crabs. And so, because of that limited amount of data regarding their life history, I want to transition to a sort of history of the fishery, so to speak. So, in decades past, Jonah crabs have long been considered bycatch by lobstermen, especially because the two species occupy very similar habitats, and just kind of a testament to that. Here's a photo from a 2015 field survey in the southern Gulf of the St. Lawrence, where they're exploring the effects of the lobster fishery on incidentally caught or bycatch species, and as the black arrow helps indicate there's some Jonah crabs in the plateau. But anyway, aside from that, regional stocks for lobster are organized in very similar fashion when it comes to Jonah crabs. And so here we have the 4 regional stocks: inshore Gulf of Maine, offshore Gulf of Maine, inshore southern New England, and offshore southern New England. And it's this last regional stock area that this figure from the ASMFC's benchmark stock assessment helps to illustrate. It's this last regional stock area that boasts the majority of Jonah crab landings. And as I'm sure many of us are aware, the southern New England region, just in general, has been subjected to a lot of warming in recent years, which has led to Jonah crabs being more targeted by commercial efforts, which we can see a bit more clearly here on the next slide, where we have commercial landings in millions of pounds on the y-axis, and then years from 2000 to 2022 on the x-axis. And each graph is showing the change in commercial landings over time for both Jonah crab and American lobster. And as we can see from the states for New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island, Jonah crab landings actually surpassed lobster landings in the late 2000s and mid to late 2010s, which is what those black circles help to emphasize. And then looking from the scale of the y-axis, we can also see that Massachusetts and Rhode Island consume the lion's share of landings in the southern New England region overall. Although please note that New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Maine were excluded here due to extremely low Jonah crab landings. And the data used to create these graphs was retrieved from the Atlantic Coastal Cooperative Statistics Program data warehouse. And so, as I mentioned, as Jonah crabs have been targeted increasingly, especially as lobster landings in the southern New England region have begun to decline, and that increase in landings was very rapid, which I think this graph helps to better illustrate. We can see it really took off around the turn of the century, early 2000s. And unfortunately, the 2023 benchmark stock assessment suggested that the fishery is declining. And that's particularly evident toward the end of the time series, where from 2019 to 2021, commercial landings went down 51%, despite a 30-fold rise in landings during the decades prior, which naturally is pretty concerning. And so we can see that decline from the previous graph with a little bit more clarity here, where on the right-hand side, we have a figure from shown previously that shows the 4 Jonah crab stocks. And then on the left, we have millions of pounds for landings by stock area, again underscoring that the offshore southern New England region boasts the majority of landings, but has also exhibited the harshest decline in those landings. And regardless, since about 2018, all of the regional stocks have exhibited declines in commercial landings, abundance estimates, and the reduced detection of crabs during state and federal surveys. And so this naturally raises some questions about stressors that these crabs, along with other benthic organisms, might be experiencing, and how they may respond to certain stressors in the future. And so it's no secret that our oceans are getting warmer. 2023 was the world's warmest year on record, and specifically within our neck of the woods, the North northeast U.S. is warming at a rate that's faster than any other large marine ecosystem on the planet. And what's particularly concerning, and has been brought up in prior talks, is the concept of marine heat waves. And so warming can be especially concerning if it goes on for a certain period of time. So marine heat waves are phenomena characterized as warm ocean temperature extremes that are above the 90th percentile for a certain period of time or in a specific part of the year. And there's several variations of marine heat waves that we can observe at the surface, bottom, or in occupying the entirety of the water column. And naturally, these marine heat waves, or this phenomenon, is particularly concerning because it's been shown to have adverse impacts on the productivity of marine ecosystems, facilitate shifts in the distribution of marine life, and additionally, from a bit more of a physics perspective, warming temperatures also pose a threat in terms of the relationship with dissolved oxygen. And so as temperatures increase, the amount of gas that our oceans can hold will go down. So ultimately, with temperatures continuing to rise, dissolved oxygen levels will begin to fall as a result. And so this kind of raises the question of, well, thinking about hypoxia. And so to highlight that, as it's really a common phenomenon in our water, in 1976 there was a mass hypoxia and mortality event in the New York Bight, and several benthic and pelagic species were adversely impacted. And more recently, Tomasetti et al. In 2023 and Dove et al. In 2004 and 2005, along with others, demonstrated that climate change-induced warming and persistent hypoxia have led several New York shell fisheries to be much more vulnerable to collapse, specifically in this instance, looking at bay scallops and American lobster. But the question sort of remains, well, what about Jonah crabs? They're not a particularly well-known or well-studied species, and little is known about the effects of warming temperatures and hypoxia on their behavior and physiology. Although it is worth noting that Lewis and Alders in 2014 found that Jonah crabs may acclimate to warmer temperatures, but the additive effects of hypoxia and warming haven't really been explored. And so that leads into some of the work that I've been able to do with colleagues at Stony Brook School of Marine Science. And so our primary objectives were to expose Jonah crabs to simulated climate change conditions in a 2x4 experimental design in the lab. And so the temperatures, or the conditions rather, that we were exploring were the effects of elevated temperatures, and then also normoxic and hypoxic conditions. So you can see the range of temperatures that were selected there. And then ultimately we wanted to see how would these conditions affect crab survival over a one-month period. And so in terms of methodology for the setup, as I mentioned, there was 4 specific temperatures: 15 degrees Celsius, 17.5 degrees Celsius, 20 degrees Celsius, and 22.5 degrees Celsius. And so there were 8 treatments in total, the 4 temperatures paired with their normoxic and hypoxic dissolved oxygen counterparts. And ultimately, 56 crabs were used throughout this experiment. So that was 7 crabs per treatment, as illustrated here. And they were kept in buckets to prevent them from interacting with each other. And then those buckets were placed into a larger tote filled with ambient seawater and hooked up to a chiller to help maintain treatment-specific conditions. And then of those 56 crabs, all of them also represented a size class that ranged from 130 to 145 millimeters. Water changes occurred on a daily basis, and they were also fed with mussels on a daily basis. And then, in order to ensure that the results that were observed weren't just the effects of extreme stress, the crabs had to get acclimated to treatment-specific conditions, so they were kept in these closed systems, again hooked up to a chiller to maintain the low temperatures, and gradually, for the warmer temperature treatments at 20 and 22.5 degrees Celsius, they were acclimated to those temperatures over a 2-week period via daily 1-degree increases in temperature. And of course, water chemistry was monitored throughout these, both the conditioning period and the month-long experiment, and specifically looking at temperature, dissolved oxygen, and salinity and pH. So results in terms of survival, across all temperatures, high dissolved oxygen treatments had significantly higher survival than their low dissolved oxygen counterparts. And as this figure helps to illustrate, you can see survival percentage on the y-axis, and then days since the start of the experiment on the x-axis. And ultimately, there were only 4 treatments that had live crabs at the end of the experiment. 15 HDO, which is hidden partially by 17.5 HDO, 20 HDO, and then 22.5 HDO. So So really underscoring that high dissolved oxygen seemed to offset the adverse effects of temperature that might have been expected, especially in those 20 and 22.5 degrees C treatments. And then it's also worth noting that there were significantly reduced survival rates caused by elevated temperatures, but an even more pronounced effect in terms of survival as a result of the dissolved oxygen level. And so for another look at the final survival percentages, there's a figure just showing the final survival percent and then treatment on the x-axis. And here we observe statistically significant differences in survival between each of the 4 remaining treatments that had live crabs in them. And as you can see, it's just follows very nicely. The crabs preferred the 15 degrees Celsius water with high dissolved oxygen. Very comparable survival rate of 17.5, but then we begin to see reductions as we get into the elevated temperature range. And even at warmer temperatures, the high dissolved oxygen seemed to mitigate the effects of thermal stress, as evidenced by the significant differences in survival between 22.5 HDO and 22.5 LDO. And it also is worth noting that the crabs used for this experiment were adults, and so I was fortunate enough to run the experiment previously with juvenile crabs and observe the inverse development. So crabs found significantly reduced mortality caused by elevated temperatures and not by dissolved oxygen levels. So the results here really may help to highlight that critical role of oxygen availability for adult Jonah crabs. And then lastly, there's a pairwise p-value heat map that helps to just better visualize the statistically significant results in terms of the differences in survival between each of the treatments, which are on the x-axis. And so there were significant differences observed between high dissolved oxygen and low dissolved oxygen temperatures for most treatment pairs, with pairwise differences between 15 degrees Celsius and 22.5 degrees Celsius being among the most statistically significant. And then here we can see, looking across same temperature pairs, that there's a statistically significant difference between high dissolved oxygen and low dissolved oxygen treatments. Again, really underscoring the significance that hypoxia seems to have had on the survival of adult Jonah crabs. And so just generally to conclude, as I just mentioned, these preliminary results would suggest that hypoxia has a significant influence on the survival of adult Jonah crabs. And then these findings may also support the theory or idea that bottom marine heat waves characterized by elevated temperatures and hypoxic conditions pose as a significant threat to the emerging Jonah crab fishery in the northeastern U.S. And moving forward, with climate change altering both temperature and dissolved oxygen levels, the availability of suitable habitats for Jonah crabs and other benthic species remains relatively uncertain. So, and understanding the species' physiological limits, or improving that understanding, is particularly critical for managing emerging fisheries, among others, especially under intensifying climatic changes. And further research, as always, whether it's laboratory trials, field monitoring, or modeling efforts, were definitely needed to help quantify the shifts for suitable Jonah crab habitat within the offshore southern New England stock area. And then lastly, I'd just like to acknowledge Al Eagles, commercial lobsterman out of Newport, Rhode Island, and a member of the Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation. He helped get me all the crabs that I needed. And then Corinne Truesdale, senior research biologist at Rhode Island's Division of Environmental Management. She helped connect me with Al and provided invaluable number of insights into the experimental design for this project. And then, of course, the support of Sea Grant and Stony Brook as well. Could not have done any of this without them. So yeah, happy to take questions.